Welcome Chosen X. You awaken into a hush that carries the precision of an instrument, a silent geometry assembled to hold a form that is finally ready to occupy space. The quiet is not absence but preparation, it is scaffolding spun of patient restraint and deliberate absence. You sense margins being drawn around your chest and shoulders, careful lines defining where courage will sit and where compassion will fold inward. This is a measured pause, a moment the world inhales while a new proportion is traced in light. There is an artisan at work whose tools are frequencies and restraint. Light does not simply fall here, it inspects. Filaments of radiance run along the shapes you have learned in hardship, following scars like sutures to reinforce what once threatened to unravel. The hours you named losses become calibrated strands. What you counted as waste is repurposed into tensile strength. Your mistakes are not stains but joins that bind two seams into one durable edge. The room shapes itself according to what you have learned to hold. Feel how the air hums in sympathy with the steady rhythms you kept in private. Each breath you took while the world demanded more has been archived as balance. The hush catalogs your choices, the mercy you practiced when it cost you comfort, the moments you declined spectacle, the decisions to repair rather than retaliate. These notes translate into fit. You are being measured by consequences you could not yet see, and the calculation favors restraint over rush. Refuse any interpretation that reduces this moment to performance. There will be no ornate display in the first unveiling. The fitting prioritizes proportion, the finished form will move like a metered law through ordinary rooms. Where crowds expect spectacle, you will operate as calibration. Your presence will alter rhythms subtly, conversations will slow, negotiations will recompose, the tempo of attention will shift without fanfare. Power here is a silent architecture. What happens in this chamber is both arithmetic and mercy. The architect of this alteration reads not trophies but alignments, the ledger contains fidelity to intention rather than accumulation of applause. Your lineage of patient acts is being converted into a capacity to hold consequence gracefully. The more you learn to carry quiet resolve, the less any public moment will incline you toward vanity. This garment of effect will not sit on you as ornament but will issue from your posture. Expect the environment to test the integrity of the fitting. Old bindings will tug, colleagues will mistake composure for indifference, and your own memory will whisper that you are unready. These are gauges, not condemnations. Each deflection is part of the tailoring process, an opportunity to trim excess and tighten fit. When you resist the urge to over-explain or to prove, the pattern tightens until the movement of your body matches the intention in your chest. You will notice small phenomena that read like signatures. Lamps will hesitate in your wake, landscapes of conversation will realign to make room, strangers will look up with a recognition that unsettles them. These are not miracles in the sense of chaos, they are precise echoes of a new register your life has attuned to. Do not seek them to validate your worth. Treat them as confirmations that the internal adjustments are syncing with outer systems. Imitation will follow notice. People who have tracked patterns will attempt to mimic cadence and posture, hoping surface moves will conjure substance. Offer them the lesson of process but guard what cannot be performed. The craftsmanship of becoming cannot be borrowed, apprenticeship is earned in silence. Protect the sanctum that permitted your wreck-raft. The world's applause is an echo chamber, keep the workshop inside intact. When at last you step toward disclosure, do so as one who has been measured, not as one seeking measurement. Let restraint remain the dominant habit. Speak in sentences that complete arcs rather than broadcast fragments. Move by proportion, not by impression. In public, let your acts do the translating. When you allow humility to remain your axis, recognition becomes a tool you wield for service rather than a crown you clutch for solace. Remember that what you receive is not simply an audience but an assignment. A calibrated presence will attract invitations that appear as favors but are actually openings for stewardship. Approach them with gratitude and scrutiny. The highest test will be whether you maintain interior simplicity when exterior structures attempt to ornament your role. The fitting has prepared you to be essential and unobtrusive at once. Breathe with the confidence of someone who knows the measure of their edge. The final pinning will be quiet, the last thread will be snugged without ceremony. There is a period of settling still to come, a final silence that will let the new balance take root. You learn soon that the scaffolding you felt in the hush was not incidental architecture but a deliberate geometry of correction, a precise lattice placed by forces that reckon with duration rather than display. What everyone called delays were not misfires but measured intervals where the blueprint adjusted to accommodate a harder currency, patience. In rooms of exile and in hallways marked by polite dismissal, the same exacting hand worked to refine the proportions of your resolve. Every refusal, every postponement, every quiet endurance was read and translated into dimension. Grief became a chisel, waiting became a grindstone that honed a sharper edge without making you brittle. This chamber translates hardship into dimension. It excises the surplus of reactive impulse and preserves the essential arcs that will later carry meaning. Think of your life as a vessel. Storms once feared to shatter you have instead hardened the ceramic of your interior. The chips and cracks were not defects but starting points for glaze. Where you feared fissures would render you unusable, the artisan filled and reinforced, creating a surface that reflects light differently now. This is how endurance becomes form, how trials are refitted into capacity. Inside you, calculations happen in quiet arithmetic, how much grief converts into empathy, how much solitude becomes a spine of clarity, which regrets can be retooled into maps for others. The measure is not punitive, it is diagnostic. It reads the density of your patience and assigns capacity accordingly. Your life has been passing through a machine that measures by consequence, every compassion tallied, every restraint logged, until a threshold is reached and a new specification approves the next phase. You are being recorded not for spectacle but for stewardship. There is a ledger in the silence that contains entries no one else sees. It records the nights you spoke gently when fury would have been easier, the moments you chose to repair a relationship rather than sever it for show, the times you remained steady when applause might have seduced you into performance. These ledger entries are subtle but cumulative. They are the currency with which you purchase the authority to be trusted without spectacle. Authority obtained this way does not need to advertise. It emerges with the quiet credibility of a well-balanced instrument. Around you, structures begin to adjust in response to that frequency. Institutions that once dismissed your presence now audit themselves in your wake. The shift is not always benevolent. Some corridors will attempt to harness the phenomenon without understanding its origin. They will misread comportment as ambition and generosity as strategy. Expect people to try to press you into roles that look like advancement but are actually instruments for their convenience. Discernment is required. Not every open door is an invitation to your calling. The calibration you endure includes exposure to counterfeiters of your own state. You will encounter individuals who mimic cadence and speak borrowed parables in attempts to invoke your audience. Their replication will be surface level. They can copy posture but not provenance. You are asked to protect the provenance without becoming brittle, welcome learners but withhold maps that would allow replication without the craft. The craft is the quiet apprenticeship of suffering and stewardship, not an algorithm of imitation. As recognition grows, so does the responsibility to preserve interior proportion. The outer world may applaud visible wins, but the true test will be whether you preserve the internal economy when external profit flows. Will you let praise recalibrate your priorities, or will you keep the ledger that tracks fidelity to the small, vulnerable acts that first qualified you? The latter secures legacy, the former converts vocation into spectacle and strips texture from the garments of purpose. Memory now serves as both archive and teacher. You will be summoned to retell particular injustices in order to translate them into instruction for others, turning personal narrative into communal compass. This narrative work asks you to be vulnerable without self-destruction, to disclose wounds that educate rather than wounds that seek pity. There is a skill in framing pain so it becomes a bridge for others. Learn it, for it will be required when your voice is used to calibrate more than consolation. Finally, understand that every test was calibrated to match the shape of the work ahead. The world you are graduating into needs someone who can bear attention without being flattened by it. It needs posture that converts scrutiny into stewardship, acclaim into allocation of resources and influence into a tool for recalibration. The secret metric is proportion. You are being formed so the force you carry never exceeds the vessel you have become. When the threshold completes, Your presence will act as a conduit, steady and deliberate, aligning structure today. You first notice the world rearranging itself around the measure of your attention. Small things shift as if gravity received new instructions, chairs incline toward the pause you hold, conversations narrow to the line where you stand, and light finds angles that make your face read like a map rather than a mask. This behavior is not random favor. It is a proportional response. The atmosphere learned the contour of restraint it had watched you practice, and now it composes circumstances to meet it. A colleague repeats a line you once spoke in a private hour. A neighbor leaves a volume at your threshold that answers a question you have not yet formed. These signals are feedback loops between your patience and the patterns you tune to. You have become a conductor of certain tones, and the field vibrates in sympathetic accord. Notice these echoes without mistaking them for finalities. They are confirmations, not crowns. Gifts arrive in manners that conceal tests. Invitations wrapped in favor will present choice as elevation, then expect exchange as repayment. Some rooms offer applause that actually functions as containment. Accept openings that allow you to steward resources and cultivate growth. Decline those that reduce service to spectacle. Test motives by tracing language to interest. Does the invitation enlarge the work you were meant to hold, or does it reframe you as ornament? Intimacy refracts influence in unexpected ways. Your presence clarifies the private corners of those closest to you. Friends reveal needs shaped by your steadiness. Family asks for what your new stature seems to promise. Generosity becomes a boundary test. Give with discernment. Make provision without dissolving the form you carry. Preserve the edge that sustains capacity. Institutions will study your reserve and offer roles that look like trust but are instruments for control. Leaders habituated to fog will attempt to harness your light while keeping the substance out of reach. When you receive offers, analyze the vector, not only the praise. Is the role designed to empower stewardship or to stage your display? Prefer function over feature. Do not be seduced by titles that privatize sorrow or commodify care. Mimicry exacerbates complexity. Casual imitators copy posture and phrase while missing provenance. Public figures will borrow cadence, consultants will package restraint as a program, and acquaintances will mimic rhythm in attempts to shortcut craft. Recognize imitation without contempt. Treat it as a map pointing to the workshop. Invite others toward craft, but protect the secret that formation requires patience rather than replication. Ritual becomes your architecture. Simple morning acts hold more value than elaborate schedules. Small practices steady the nervous system in ways that excuses cannot. Guard these rituals as you guard currency. They are the scaffolding that prevents influence from collapsing into exhibition. Build unnegotiable rights that replenish rather than extract. Language will prove the sharpest instrument. Learn to speak in sentences that complete arcs and avoid ornamental verbosity. A brief, well-placed phrase can repair more than a speech. Practice precision and allow silence to be your amplifier. When tempted to fill hush with rhetoric, remember that the work you carry prefers measured cadence over theatrical velocity. Resistance follows clarity. Structures built on opacity will interpret your transparency as an attack. Expect strategies designed to fragment your influence. Identify those moves, then answer with calm. Delay reactive speed and employ the ledger of past small acts as your measure for response. Act with authority only when calibration, not impulse, authorizes action. Loneliness will be part of the passage. Fewer people will share the interior bandwidth you hold. Conversations grow tactical and less confessional. Make solitude a laboratory. Curate companions deliberately. Let intimacy be deep and few rather than broad and shallow. In that curated space you learn to rest without producing admiration. Do not allow complexity to be simplified into slogans. When others compress your presence into a brand, refuse the reduction. Redirect attention to the daily disciplines that built you. Offer process, not packaging. Teach craft. Protect nuance. Influence that endures resists being flattened into a look. Authority now shifts from contest to coordination. Where pressure once demanded triumph, it now invites orchestration. You will be tasked with aligning systems rather than merely dismantling them. Translate your ledger of small ethical acts into practices that outlive your tenure. Construction over accumulation becomes the metric of legacy. Stand steady. Speak precisely. Guard ritual. Let imitation become an invitation. The world rearranges itself, but the shaping that matters stays internal. Your interior architecture will be the measure others use. Hold it carefully and keep translating presence into policy. You now stand at a ridge where the light that once shaped you meets currents that would shape you for other ends. The elevation is not literal but moral. It raises your decisions into clearer relief and exposes pressures you could not sense from lower ground. Here opponents are less likely to be overt and more likely to operate in patterns: a smile that times a cut, a compliment sharpened to redirect, the polite squeeze of hand that reroutes influence into private ledgers. These pressures test the integrity of what was stitched into you. They are not accidents. They are instruments. Expect strategy masked as support. Institutions will present structured generosity that appears to increase reach while secretly narrowing freedom. People who once invoked your name to shame you will now invoke it to redirect you. Colleagues will offer partnership in terms that redistribute responsibility without increasing authority. Learn to read the fine print of human generosity. Treat offers as architectural proposals requiring blueprint review rather than as instant legitimations. The craft you carry will be preserved if you insist on transparency, not convenience. There will be those who attempt to privatize compassion into commodities. Watch how empathy gets repackaged as spectacle. When charity is staged for applause, it loses the structural qualities that make it regenerative. Your role will be to steward resources in ways that sustain systems rather than stage them. That means refusing some flattering platforms that would render your work theatrical. It means saying no to arrangements that subsidize image at the expense of infrastructure. This refusal is not absence but fidelity. Opposition will refine you. Expect covert campaigns that seek to thin your base by shifting narratives. Rumor will be applied as solvent to dissolve trust. Those who cannot replicate the process of formation will construct stories designed to confuse. When such currents arrive, anchor to documented acts of service, not to the mood of immediate defense. Let your ledger of small, consistent actions be the architecture you present. Concrete records and steady witness will neutralize smear more effectively than counter-spectacle. Your inner solitude will be a tactic as well as a refuge. In moments when the world clamors for response, choose containment. Silence is not an abdication, it is an instrument of control. The discipline of not answering every provocation preserves your bandwidth for matters that require presence rather than performance. Guard the channels that funnel your attention. Not all feedback deserves immediate consumption. Some disturbances are designed to distract from the work that builds legacy rather than headlines. Testify with restraint. When you must speak, do so with the economy of a craftsman carving the final joint. Every word should complete a project rather than open new, unnecessary rooms. Speak to re-establish structure, not to win applause. Your vocabulary will become a tool of consolidation. Precision in language protects against misinterpretation and reduces the chance that your words will be weaponized. Train your phrase to serve function, not flourish. Boundaries will be your most underrated instrument. Many will assume that rising influence requires boundless availability. The opposite is true. Limits clarify responsibility and conserve creative reserve. Teaching colleagues how to approach you secures a work environment where allocation of tasks is proportional to capacity. Boundaries do not make you unkind. They make systems accountable and prevent the dilution of purpose. You will encounter well-intentioned mediators who believe they are helping but are actually rerouting authority. They present compromise as maturity while eroding the structures you were meant to repair. Discern whether concessions strengthen resilience or simply distribute risk. The moral calculus here is subtle. Favor adjustments that preserve core functions rather than changes that simply redistribute pleasure or pain. There will also be allies who appear in unexpected forms. Some supporters will arrive without title yet carry disproportionate influence because they understand the architecture of transformation. Learn to recognize substance over status. A quiet donor, a patient organizer, a modest team member often secures far more long-term movement than public allies who speak more than act. Reward fidelity with stewardship, not trophies. Resistance will press on soft spots you assumed resolved. Old wounds can reopen under the pressure of scrutiny. When they do, treat them like tempering steel. Do not throw them back into the fire without adjusting the alloy. Re-examine the practices that sustained you. Recalibrate rituals that once sufficed. Reinforce relationships that serve as corrective mirrors. Repair is skilled work and requires patience equal to creation. The temptation to expedite the process will be constant. Expect offers that propose shortcuts to visibility in exchange for concessions you cannot afford. Decline those that require you to substitute depth for speed. Legacy demands time and the refusal to yield core commitments for the sake of rapid elevation. Let seasons govern advancement rather than headline cycles. The long arc outlives flashy impulsivity. When attacks come, avoid binary thinking. Not every opposition is total hostility. Some critics can be collaborators if listened to with discernment. Distinguish between destructive forces and constructive critique. Invite the latter into private forums where nuance can be practiced and where solutions can be crafted without spectacle. In this way, resistance becomes material for refinement rather than ruin. Above all, hold humility as a practical posture. Pride accelerates decay, humility extends shelf life. Carry accomplishment as responsibility and do not allow accomplishment to become identity. The most dangerous corrosion is when merit is mistaken for immunity. Keep rituals that center you. Return to ascetic practices that remind you of dependence rather than entitlement. These practices are not denial, they are recalibration. At the ridge, your choices resonate downstream. Every refusal and acceptance shapes not only your path but the pathways of those positioned below you. Act with the consciousness that your integrity is a resource shared by others. When you steward well, you create structures that outlast you. When you bow to expedience, you fracture the infrastructure. Choose stewardship. Choose measured courage. Choose craft over caption and let the work you were tailored to do continue to align systems long after the applause fades. The chamber becomes a threshold that opens inward and outward at once. The air reorganizes to respect finish over flourish. A gesture that once seemed trivial now reroutes discourse. An answered kindness redistributes authority in a meeting. This is not a spectacle, this is an arrangement. You translate private economy into public architecture, shaping systems by posture and choice. As the final fittings are made, recall the crafts of your earlier seasons, small routines that repaired you quietly, late vigils that taught constancy, the habitual returns to disciplines that replenished rather than depleted. Those private practices are scaffolds now. Protect them. If you let ritual drift toward image, the support that sustains you will thin and the form will sag under expectation. The widening that greets you will be mistaken for fame by some. Resist that misreading. It is a service expanding its field. Openings will present themselves as favors and sometimes as traps. Treat offers as vessels to fill rather than stages to mount. Decide beforehand what to steward and what to decline. Refusal is a tool of fidelity, not scarcity. Be wary of alliances that reframe presence as a product. Institutions can clasp your name to commodify trust. Choose collaborations that amplify structure and decline those that trade depth for optics. Look for partners who understand accountability more than applause. Opt for relationships that increase capacity rather than visibility alone. The temptation of rapid ascent will be constant. Shortcuts glitter with promises, but they fray the necessary fibers. Slowly woven reach resists storm, hastily sown renown unravels with pressure. Allow time to remain your ally. Prefer seasons over headlines. When you doubt, consult the ledger of small acts rather than public metrics. Memory can be cured or trapped depending on the frame you apply. Use recollection to measure fidelity, not to inflate entitlement. Record practices that sustain you and return to them when noise suggests alternative maps. Imitators will copy rhythm without sharing origin. Some will seek to monetize resonance or to convert nuance into digestible products. Teach translation but resist reduction. Invite serious learners into formation and decline offers that promise quick templates for depth. Silence remains your most effective instrument. Calibrated speech and measured restraint produce authority that cannot be easily co-opted. A well-timed pause clarifies like a beam of light defining an arch. Speak rarely enough that your sentences complete projects rather than create new ambiguities. Boundaries are underrated architecture. Limits do not make you less generous, they make provision sustainable. When you set clear limits, you teach systems how to allocate responsibility. Those limits protect the vessel of influence so it can carry more people without collapsing. Expect opposition to recenter itself as critique. Some attacks will be thinly veiled offers, others will be attempts to fracture trust. Respond with documented acts and steady witness rather than reactive spectacle. Let proof disarm rumor and patience diffuse the frenzy. Allies will arrive in forms that disappoint expectations. A quiet coordinator, a steadfast volunteer, an unassuming supporter often accomplishes more than a titled advocate. Reward service with stewardship and center the work over personalities. Final alignment feels like a tightening of frequency beneath the skin. It is not weight but wavelength, or resonance that hums with obligation rather than gala. When the field rearranges, you will know the world is responding to a new gravity, not granting you new worth. At the center of your screen, a moving image waits. It continues the instruction in motion and sound, translating cadence into visible practice. Clicking it is not casual, it is to enter a sequence that extends the disciplines you already hold. Watch with the posture of someone receiving commissioning. Subscribe and enable notifications so each new lesson arrives like a ritual bell, a reminder to return to the workshop. Do not treat the video as a spectacle to consume. Approach it as a tool to append to the private scaffolds you carry. Join the sequence as a participant and not as a mere observer. Keep the rituals that formed you. Continue to refuse shortcuts and steward with measured courage. Walk forward steady and let the structures you helped craft outlast the season that raised you. Legacy will be measured by systems that survive your absence, not by transient headlines. Teach successors stewardship rather than posture. Design protocols that redistribute care so rooms do not empty when you depart. Leave pathways others can walk without depending on spectacle. Let humility be your operating system and service the axis of decision. Return often to the quiet practices that formed you and cultivate them publicly and privately. Keep the workshop alive and let the work outlast season.